My 4-year relationship with Richard wasn't a journey. It was more like a guided tour where the guide abandoned me halfway up the mountain, and only then did I realize I'd been carrying everyone's bags the entire time. We first met at a community garden project. He was the self-proclaimed compost king, giving this incredibly passionate speech about how breaking down is the first step to building something new. My plant-loving heart just swooned. Looking back, I should have seen it for what it was, the very first red flag in a whole parade of them. 4 years later, the only thing that had been thoroughly broken down and composted was my own self-respect. When I look at the ledger of our relationship, the numbers are pretty grim. His name was never on the lease. His credit was temporarily damaged. A temporary state that miraculously lasted 1,460 days. He was between jobs about 60% of the time. And when he did have money, it flowed straight to his gaming setup. His boys were his collectibles. He asked to borrow my car more often than he asked about my day, but I was in love, or at least I thought I was. I became an archaeologist of his potential, constantly dusting off every sorry and next time for any sign of the man I thought he could be. I convinced myself that his potential was worth my investment. Then, the universe sent me a brutally literal wake-up call. A driver ran a red light and T-boned my car. I woke up in a hospital bed with a broken leg, 3 fractured ribs, and a concussion. The world was a fuzzy, painful blur. Richard visited me once for a grand total of 20 minutes. He said hospitals gave him anxiety and that he needed to process the trauma in his own way. His trauma. I was the one lying there with metal pins sticking out of my leg, and he was the one who needed to process it. The logic was just baffling. While Richard was off processing, my best friend Anastasia became my rock. She slept in that awful vinyl chair in my hospital room. She helped me hobble to the bathroom. She even washed my hair in that tiny little sink. True friendship isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up with dry shampoo and gentle hands when you're at your most broken and vulnerable. She was there, in the trenches with me, without a single complaint. One afternoon, it was Anastasia's face that told me something was seriously wrong. Her smile got really tight as she was scrolling on her phone, and she was trying to angle it away from me. "What is it?" I asked, the pain meds making me blunt and taking away my filter. She just shook her head. "Nothing. Just stupid stuff on the internet." But I knew her too well. I reached out and grabbed her phone, and there it was. The screen glowed with the familiar lights of a party. I saw the curve of a familiar arm wrapped around a familiar waist. It was Katie, his ex. But it was the caption that felt like a knife twisting in my heart. It read, "Finally free from the needy drama queen and her constant demands." The needy drama queen. That was me, apparently. Lying in a hospital bed. The world didn't shatter into a million pieces. It crystallized. Everything became cold, hard, and perfectly clear. There I was, broken and drugged, while he was out celebrating his liberation from me. And the worst part? Our so-called mutual friends were cheering him on in the comments. "Glad you're happy, bro. You deserve better." Not a single person asked, "Hey, isn't your girlfriend in the hospital right now?" The silence from them was deafening. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stared at the white, sterile ceiling, and in that quiet, a single thought echoed in my mind, loud and clear. My name was on the lease. My credit paid the bills. I held all the power here. And right there, in that haze of pain and betrayal, a plan began to form. A cold, precise, and beautifully simple plan. The Compost King was about to learn that some things, once broken down, don't build something new. They just become fuel for a much, much bigger fire. While I was laid up, recovering at my friend Anastasia's place after a car accident, my boyfriend Richard was floating in and out of our shared apartment, completely oblivious to my pain. Or at least that's what I thought. He was busy, I later found out, but not with taking care of me. He was busy interviewing for a new job. A high-powered finance job, no less. And the cherry on top, he got the interview through a recommendation from my former roommate's brother. a tiny detail he conveniently forgot to mention. But every fairy tale has its end, and this one was about to have a spectacular finale. The day of reckoning arrived. My brother Dylan, bless his heart, showed up at my apartment, not alone, but with two of his biggest, most helpful friends. It was time for a little spring cleaning. We went through the apartment and packed every single item that belonged to Richard, and I mean everything. We started with the big-ticket items. The $2,000-$800 gaming PC he bought with money he borrowed from our joint grocery account. Then came his precious collection of Funko Pop figurines, still pristine in their boxes because they were appreciating in value. Next, we moved his throne, a massive, over-the-top gaming chair that has seen better days. And of course, we didn't forget the little things, the crusty socks hidden under the couch, the half-eaten bags of chips littering every surface. It was like we were curating a museum dedicated to the modern man-child. Now, let me be very clear. We didn't break anything. We didn't set anything on fire, as tempting as it might have been. We were methodical, we were clean, and we were efficient. We simply relocated his life to his most appropriate new home, the large, green, very spacious dumpster behind our apartment building. The self-proclaimed compost king could finally return to the cycle of decay, right where he belonged. It was a beautiful, symbolic moment. His entire kingdom of clutter, now just another layer of trash. For the few items of actual importance like his birth certificate and passport, because I'm not a complete monster, I sealed them in a box and left it with my landlord for safekeeping. My work was almost done. With Richard's worldly possessions sorted, it was time to make two very important phone calls. The first call was to my landlord. I explained, as calmly as I could, that my ex-boyfriend would no longer be living with me and that I needed the locks changed immediately for my own safety. He was surprisingly understanding and promised to send a locksmith over that very afternoon. One problem solved. The second call was a bit more strategic. I dialed the number for my former roommate's brother, the one who worked at the fancy financial firm where Richard had just interviewed. I kept it professional. I forwarded him the social media posts I found, the ones of Richard and his new girl, Katie, all over each other while I was recovering. Then, I provided a very succinct, very factual summary of Richard's financial management skills, complete with bank statements and spreadsheets I had meticulously prepared. I didn't need to add any drama or embellish the story. The truth, in all its documented glory, was absolutely damning. And then, all I had to do was wait. The fallout was faster and more spectacular than I could have ever imagined. My phone started blowing up at the crack of dawn the next day. The first text was from Richard at precisely 6:03 a.m. It read, in all caps, "Where is my stuff? Are you insane?" My collection was worth thousands. I just smiled. A few minutes later, at 6:15 a.m., another one came through. "You're going to pay for this, you psychotic bitch." The anger was escalating. I watched the messages roll in, a beautiful symphony of his desperation. Then the tone shifted. At 6:45 a.m., a new message. "Baby, please. I was drunk. Katie means nothing. I was so stressed about your accident. Call me, I love you." Oh, now he was stressed about my accident. How convenient. The performance was pathetic, but the grand finale was yet to come. The piece de resistance arrived in the form of a phone call from his mother, Deborah. She was sobbing, putting on a real performance. "Sweetheart," she cried into the phone, "you can't do this to him. He made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. He was going to propose to you, you know. He had a ring." I highly doubted that, but I let her continue. "You've ruined his entire life with this. This vindictive stunt you pulled with his job. They rescinded the offer. How could you be so cruel?" I just listened. I let her vent. I let her cry. I let her accuse me of everything under the sun. My silence became my new superpower. When she finally paused, presumably to take a breath, I asked one simple, quiet question. Deborah, can you tell me the last time Richard paid his half of the rent? The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It was a heavy, deafening silence that spoke volumes. She had no answer. I didn't need to press the issue or rub it in. I simply said, I'll email you the financial records. All the bank statements, the late notices, everything. Then you'll understand. I didn't wait for a reply. I just hung up. I sent the email, attached all the proof, and then I blocked her number. I blocked Richard's number. I blocked every mutual friend who tried to tell me I went too far. I took back my apartment. I took back my peace, and most importantly, I took back my life. It was the best spring cleaning I've ever done. Thank you so much for watching my story. If you've ever been in a situation like this, know that you are not alone, and you have the strength to get out. Don't forget to like this video, and subscribe to my channel for more stories about taking your power back. See you next time. My final emails to Richard's mother, Deborah, were less of a desperate plea and more of a forensic accounting report. I attached spreadsheets detailing 4 years of unpaid rent, screenshots of his constant loan requests, and bank records of the credit card debt I'd racked up just covering his share of our life together. For good measure, I included the finally free post I'd made, just to provide context for my sudden departure. Her initial response was a masterclass in deflection, a beautiful tapestry of denial. But as she clicked through the evidence, that tapestry began to unravel thread by thread. The story Richard had carefully constructed for his family, the one where he was the generous, long-suffering provider and I was the unstable, demanding burden, it all just dissolved in the harsh, undeniable light of bank statements. There was no arguing with the numbers. While Deborah was having her world turned upside down by the truth, Richard was preparing what he must have thought was a grand romantic gesture. It arrived at Anastasia's apartment, where I was staying. It wasn't flowers or chocolates, it was a compost bin. A large, black plastic bin filled to the brim with soil, food scraps, and a thriving population of worms. Tucked inside was a note, scrawled in his familiar handwriting, babbling about how our love, like compost, needed to break down to rebuild into something fertile. It was peak Richard. But the piece de resistance, nestled amongst some decomposing spinach and coffee grounds, was a small, tarnished ring. I pulled it out. It was cheap, probably silver-plated, and engraved on the inside. It wasn't my birthday. It was his ex-girlfriend's. The metaphor was so painfully, tragically perfect, it was almost poetic. Anastasia, ever the documentarian of my chaotic life, filmed the entire ceremonial procession of me and that compost bin to the building's dumpster. With a satisfying thud, the grand gesture, the worms, the decomposing love, and the wrong birthday ring were all exactly where they belonged, in the trash. That dumpster moment felt like a turning point. The final layers of his elaborate deception began to peel away, almost of their own accord. It was like the universe decided it was time for the truth to come out, all at once. A few days later, I got a message on social media. It was from Katie, the ex-girlfriend from the old photo, the one whose birthday was engraved on that ring. She had seen my posts and wanted to reach out. Richard had told her, with a straight face, that he and I had broken up months ago. He had been trying to get back with her while still living with me, feeding her a whole new set of lies. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Then, an even bigger bombshell dropped. Deborah called me. The initial shock and denial had given way to a horrified acceptance. She confessed, her voice trembling with shame, that over the past few years Richard has siphoned over $15,000 from her. The money was always for some fabricated crisis of mine. He told her I had a gambling problem, that I needed money for an emergency medical procedure, that I crashed my car. Lie after lie, all designed to paint me as a damsel in distress and him as the noble hero, borrowing from his mother to save his hapless girlfriend. Hearing this, I just felt a wave of cold clarity. It was never about me. It was all about his endless, insatiable need. The dominoes just kept falling. His last remaining friend, Remy, the one who let Richard crash on his couch after I left, kicked him out. Why? Because he'd caught Richard stealing from him. With nowhere left to run and no one left to manipulate, Richard's world imploded in a spectacular chain reaction of his own making. He tried to start a GoFundMe, claiming he was a victim of a malicious smear campaign. It was so transparently fraudulent that it got reported into oblivion within a day. His desperation escalated. He showed up at my old apartment building, the one we'd shared, and caused a scene, screaming my name in the lobby. The building manager called the police, and when they ran his name, they found he had several outstanding warrants for unpaid tickets and a minor theft charge from years ago. They arrested him on the spot. The final image I have of him from that time came from a mutual acquaintance who saw him a week later. His car had been repossessed. He was sleeping on a park bench, utterly and completely alone. All the bridges he'd burned had left him on an island of his own creation. And then there was silence. A sudden, blessed, and profound silence. The constant barrage of texts, the frantic calls, the manufactured dramas, it all just stopped. In that quiet, for the first time in 4 years, I could finally hear myself think. And in that quiet, I began to heal. The healing was physical at first. My leg, which had been in a cast from an injury I sustained while moving out, finally mended. The cast came off and I took my first wobbly unaided steps into my new life. I found a sunny, secure apartment of my own, a place that felt safe and solid. I used what little savings I had to buy a sturdy, reliable used car. I named her Freedom. Every time I turned the key in the ignition, it felt like a small act of reclamation. A few weeks later, something extraordinary happened. Deborah asked to meet me for lunch. I was hesitant, but I went. We sat in a quiet cafe, and she looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. She apologized profoundly and sincerely, not just for Richard's actions, but for her own role in enabling them, for believing his lies for so long. She said something I'll never forget. I failed as a mother if I raised a son who could do this. Then she slid a cashier's check across the table. It was a significant amount, enough to clear a large chunk of the debt I had incurred because of him. She said it wasn't charity. It was restitution. It was an act of accountability so stunning, so unexpected, that it cracked open a part of my heart I thought had been permanently sealed off. I accepted it, not as a handout, but as a closing of a painful chapter. But the most important healing, the deepest work, happened on the inside. I started therapy. For the first few sessions, I talked about him, about the anger, the betrayal. But my therapist gently guided me toward a different line of questioning. Who was I in that relationship? What needs of my own was I trying to meet by constantly trying to fix him? I began to grieve, not for the loss of him, but for the loss of the version of myself who believed that love had to be a constant, draining sacrifice. I finally saw with painful clarity how I had confused being needed with being loved. My entire identity had become wrapped up in managing his chaos, in being the calm in his self-made storm. I had been propping up his potential for so long, I'd forgotten to build a foundation for myself. 1 month to the day after I'd thrown that compost bin in the dumpster, I stood on the small balcony of my new apartment. The sun was warm on my face. I was tending to a small pot of succulents, those tough, resilient little plants that can survive almost anything. As I gently watered them, I realized there was no grand feeling of victory, no triumphant surge of, I won. There was just peace, a profound, quiet, and deeply satisfying peace. The weight of his potential, that heavy, invisible burden I had carried for so long I had mistaken it for love, was finally gone. The compost king, as Anastasia and I had dubbed him, was finally just fertilizer in the soil of my past. And I, at long last, was finally beginning to grow. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share. But if it helps even one person recognize the signs of a toxic relationship and find the strength to leave, then it's worth it. Remember to take care of yourselves. Thanks for watching.